Hey class, this video will show you how to use the wind component chart from the Diamond DA40 Pilot's Operating Handbook to determine the headwind component and the crosswind component when you're taking off from a runway. Let's take a look at the chart first. You'll notice that the chart includes these straight lines or spokes emanating from the center of the chart. Each one of these lines represents the angular difference between the runway heading and the wind direction. So this is the 10-degree difference, this is a 20-degree difference, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50 degrees, and so on. Then you have these curved lines, or what I call arcs. These arcs represent wind speed. So this arc represents 40 knots, this arc represents 30 knots, 20 knots, and this arc represents 10 knots. At the bottom of the chart, you see we have the crosswind component. 0, 10, 20, 30, or 40 knots. And on the left, we have the headwind component, 0, 10, 20, 30, or 40 knots. As I've said before, most of these charts come with an example to help you understand how to use the chart. And this chart's no different. It gives us an example of a flight direction of 360, or 360 degrees, which is directly north, and a wind direction of 32 degrees at 30 knots. The difference between the flight direction, or the runway heading, and the wind direction is 32 degrees. So we need to find the line that represents 32 degrees. We don't have one already drawn in, so we have to draw one in ourselves. We draw that line down to the wind speed of 30 knots. This is the arc that represents 30 knots. And from that point where they intersect, we draw a straight line to the bottom to find our crosswind component of 16 knots. The headwind can be found by drawing a straight line to the left from the same point to get our headwind component to be about 26 knots. Now let's look at the first problem in the handout. The first problem gives us a choice between runway 4 and runway 22. Runway 4 points 040 on the compass, and runway 22 points to 220 degrees, or 220. Which runway is closest to the wind direction of 060? The first problem that we're given. Well, that would be runway 4. Runway 4 points 040 on the compass, and there's only 20 degrees difference between 060 and 040. So runway 4 is the favored runway. Now we need to determine the headwind component and the crosswind component. We need to look at the chart for that. So the difference is 20 degrees between the runway heading and the wind direction. So we find the spoke that represents 20 degrees. And the wind speed is 25 knots. So we draw a line straight down halfway between the arc that represents 30 knots and the arc that represents 20 knots. So right down to that point. So straight down to halfway between those two arcs. And then from that point, we draw a line straight down to get our crosswind component. And that looks to be about 8 knots. So we'll write that in, 8 knots under crosswind. And then to get our headwind component, we go from the same point and draw a straight line to the left. It looks like our headwind component is about 24 knots. So we'll write that down here under headwind component. And it's as simple as that.